And thank you to everyone for coming out. Thanks to everyone at Shelf Life Books. I love Shelf Life. I was just talking in the kind of green room. I go there lots. I just got a lot of books there the other day. It's a really great bookstore. And thank you to Dorothy Bentley and the Writers Guild of Alberta for putting this all together and for asking me to host the panel. And of course, thanks in advance to our excellent panelists who we're going to get to after I do my little-ish spiel. I know for a lot of people, this week has been pretty horrifying week news-wise. Here in Alberta, this past weekend, there was a police shooting, and a South Sudanese man, Lajor Tuel, a former child soldier, who was suffering from a mental health crisis, was killed. This isn't an uncommon event across the country. Police doing check-ins for mental health incidents and things not getting de-escalated and out of control. And also this week in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott is trying to have gender confirming care for transgender youth redefined as abuse, and asking the the state's child welfare agency to conduct investigations into any possible cases, though the Department of Family and Protective Services is not under his direct influence. And of course, with the news yesterday and today, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, I know it's like, my senses are kind of shot. So for anyone who has taken the time to come to this talk, I really appreciate that you've come here. And I hope that everybody is doing well. I wish everyone well. Drink lots of water, try to take care of yourself, because it is hard on everyone. And we need to cultivate as wide of an emotional bandwidth as we can to kind of better take care of one another. And part of how we do that is making sure we're healthy. Our talk today isn't necessarily like a lighthearted escape from difficult topics, though it's probably less acutely intense. And I think it's going to be really heartening and rewarding for everyone involved. So I'm here today hosting the panel surrounding discussion on Freedom to Read Week. Just some notes from Freedom to Read Week's website. Freedom to Read Week is an annual event that encourages Canadians to think about and reaffirm their commitment to intellectual freedom, which is guaranteed them under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is organized by the Book and Periodical Council, the umbrella organization for Canadian associations that are or whose members are primarily involved with the writing, editing, translating, publishing, producing, distributing, lending, marketing, reading, and selling of written words. The website has a lot of really great resources, really comprehensive guide to banned and challenged books that people can submit more examples to, and lots of articles exploring freedom of expression. There's a really great Desmond Cole one on there that I think everybody should read. So if you have some free time to check out the website for Freedoms to Read Week, please do so. I think I know at least I have sometimes taken for granted that free speech is a right hard fought for. Oftentimes when I think of the loudest shouts for free speech, in my mind, the first thing that comes up is politically right-leaning folks sometimes who'd like to say whatever they want without consequence, which is a form of free speech, I guess. Sometimes the message is more mixed. Take, for example, this anonymously published 1902 op-ed in the New York Times Book Review, which it's crazy they've been around that long, but they have. The New York Times the other day contained an account, partly ridiculous and partly disgusting, of the tribulations which a library at Evanston has got into by undertaking to regulate the reading morals of that community. It appeared that the chief censor was the librarian, and her principle of exclusion was simple. Any book that contained any sentence to which the respectable person objected was thereupon taboo. At least that is the only way in which we can account for the fact that pretty much all the recent novels that amount to anything or have anything to say were on the blacklist of this singular institution, to interfere with the reading of other people and to insist that they shall read nothing but what you think good for them is a form of busybodyism, in the pursuit of which much annoyance may be inflicted. If the prurient prudes find in something a current book which it would not be good for such a child to know, the offending volume must therefore go. It matters not that it may be a work of genius by a writer of distinction and bear the imprint of a respectable publishing house. If somebody with a cultivated sense for indecency finds it indecent, it is doomed. On such principles, the volumes on the shelves of the Evanston Library will soon be reduced to the goody-goody class, which no sane soul can find interest in reading. What sort of protection to the public morals is it to prescribe any book that any old woman of either sex and of any age may find immoral, and then to publish the fact of that proscription? One would rather live under the Russian censorship than under that the Russian censor is at least a male. Kind of a shocking op-ed. The New York Times Book Review had a big history for kind of public discourse like that. So obviously some of us have different ideas of what free speech constitutes. For some of us, it's, well, I want to read anything. I want fun things. I want, manly things. What startles me most is that if you read this 1902 op-ed, which is anonymously penned, which was the house style at the time, with misogynist overtones, that complains about people with a cultivated sense for indecency, sensitive people, things like that. If you tweaked the register of this complaint a little bit, it could have come from the internet in 2022 without much change. So this is obviously something that we're thinking about that has a long history of being debated. I think that the right to write truthfully with respect to your own experiences and the right to read widely and without censor are two expressions of the same principle. It is really those most volatile voices in the Canadian public sphere that are censored, such as public pseudo-intellectual Jordan Peterson, who, receiving criticism for his inane and hateful babbling, has simply become richer and now enjoys a larger platform than ever merited before. More often, the marginalized, mindful, and sensitive culture workers those who question the status quo and share uncomfortable realities with us are victims of censorship. For example, Derek McCormick's most recent book of fiction, boldly titled Castle Faggot, was briefly delisted from Amazon's marketplace near its release, presumably for said title. Just one example in a long history of books written by queer writers subject to charges and accusations of obscenity. Looking outside of Canada as well, recently, Art Spiegelman's iconic graphic novel memoir, Mouse, which details his difficult relationship with his father, a Holocaust survivor. Just last month, a Tennessee school board removed Mouse from its school curriculum. Addressing this controversy and reviewing the school board members' meetings himself, Spiegelman cites several of those concerns about Mouse as too crude of an account of the Holocaust, and details what the school board was looking to replace it with. What we need is a book that shows that the patriotism we can proudly feel for having liberated the Jews from the camps. Spiegelman concludes, even if they say they're willing to teach the Holocaust, they want a fuzzier, warmer, gentler Holocaust that shows how great the Americans were, and turns to ask of us, this is a dangerous world. It's getting more dangerous. Are you going to try to confront it in a way that's useful, or hide your head in myths and stories that are heartwarming? In 1988, the Soviet Writers' Union invited Canadian writer Douglas Glover and others to tour the Soviet Union, a country that no longer exists, to meet writers and publishers and promote amicable intellectual exchange. Writing about his experiences at the time, Glover relates these anecdotes. The Soviets have massively popular literary magazines in which novels appear in serial form much as they did in the time of Dickens, Dostoevsky, and Tolstoy. What these magazines print often dates from the Stalin and Brezhnev eras. Comparatively little contemporary writing appears in the official press, yet huge chunks of Soviet literary history are simply missing. Spend a day in any Canadian university library and you'll know more about what's been written by the best Russian, Ukrainian, or Georgian writers in the last 70 years than the common reader in the Soviet Union. Joseph Brodsky, winner of the 1987 Nobel Prize for Literature, left the Soviet Union in 1972 after being charged with parasitism, a catch-all term Soviets use for people who don't fit, can't find jobs, etc. Another Leningrad writer, Daniel Granin, told me Brodsky left because he was forced to live in unendurable circumstances. He was squeezed out. A lot of things contributed to this. For one, the things he wrote. Somehow Brodsky wasn't eager to obey certain regulations of both poetical and civil life. Soviet editors I spoke with were clearly a bit mystified by that Nobel Prize. When he left, he had only published 3 poems in the Soviet Union, said one. I could go on about the emancipatory power of literature, which I think is self-evident, especially for everyone here. And I could list countless examples of the state both restricting access to and destroying vast systems of knowledge as a mechanism of control. But I'll just bring up one last example from my own reading for now, because if I don't stop here, I won't. And everyone else is going to be much more interesting than me, I promise. Writing for, surprisingly, Teen Vogue, in 2017, on Nazi censorship, Lucy Diavolo relates, on May 6, 1933, Nazi demonstrators raided the libraries of the Institut für Sexualwissenschaft, a German name that roughly translates to the Institute of Sexology. The institute was a privately operated research space for the studies of human sexuality. More than 20,000 books were taken from the shelves and burned days later in the streets by Nazi youth groups. And later on in the article, detailing the legacy of all this, Diavolo notes, the Nazis exploited existing laws to attack the LGBTQ community, but the legacy of their enforcement practices lingered for decades. It took East Germany until 1968 and West Germany until 1994 to repeal the laws Nazis used to persecute LGBTQ people. Modern day Germany only just voided those charges this June, which would have been June 2017. So I think it's, like I said, it's self-evident that literature is obviously something that is like a great form of dissent, and having access to literature is really important. You know, the samizdat, the prohibited literature movement in the Soviet Union is another great thing. But that's enough of me. I don't want to go on and on. I just wanted to kind of contextualize my own relationship and recent history of this. A lot of my knowledge of these things comes primarily from queer literature, but as soon as you start thinking about these things, it's a very big question, a very big discussion to have, which is why we're so fortunate to have such great panelists here today. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists and then ask them to speak a little bit about their relationship to these principles related to Freedom to Read Week. And then afterwards, we're going to transition to more of an open group discussion. And I'll try to monitor the chat if I don't get totally wrapped up. And if we have time at the end, I'll do my best to field some of the comments and questions in the chat with the panelists. So thanks so much for humoring me and my little rant, my missive. We're going to start here today with Theresa Shea. Theresa is the author of 2 novels, The Shade Tree, published in 2021, winner of the Guernica Prize, and The Unfinished Child from 2013. Finalists for the George Bunier Award and the Alberta Reader's Choice Award. Theresa lives in Edmonton, and for more information, you can visit her website at www.theresashea.com. And I believe you can, if you want to just click a link, go to the event page, and you should be able to find it there. Take it away, Theresa.
Thanks, Benjamin. And thank you for, I was so delighted to be invited to be on this panel. So I'm grateful that some people showed up so we'd have an audience. I want to pick up a little bit on what Benjamin talked about, the emancipatory role of literature. So when I was first asked to be on the panel, I thought, oh my gosh, I started running in about 18 different directions and researching this, that, and the other thing. And of course, freedom has been a word bandied about a lot lately. And as Benjamin said, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And, you know, I'm a mom and I've got kids and I worry about their future and, you know, what the heck's going on. So I thought I could talk about a lot of things, but what I know the most is my own experience about books. So I want to talk about that because I can't imagine, I wouldn't be me without books. Books were my first love. And I, in many ways, think that books really saved my life because I was one of those kids who carried a book with her everywhere she went. We moved around a lot as a kid. I was always a new kid. It was like my books and my dog, right? And I was lonely as a child, and books, you know, I think about that C.S. Lewis quotation, we read to know that we're not alone. And that was me. I just read voraciously. And I was fortunate to be able to visit libraries a lot. I even remember we used to have a little bookmobile that would drive around and show up, and it was like the best thing. And like, even today, when I call in a bunch of holes at the library and I go to pick them up, I'm like, oh my God, it's like the best day ever when my books come in, right? Because I came from, like, I was this little kid with a tender little heart, and I didn't understand the world around me. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. I felt like I was confused a lot. So I looked to books to find out what was going on. And I also read above my age. So I have vivid memories of being in the library and like hiding out in the stacks, because librarians can be rather terrifying at times. And if they found me in the adult section, I had to scamper and get out. So like I'd read things like, like Danielle Steele to get some of the, sexy bits, or like, what is it like to grow up and to have a partner? And what is it like for this? What is it like for that? And I didn't have a house where we talked a lot about politics. Like I didn't know where to go to figure out the world. So I turned to books, and books have continued to be probably my truest friend. I also think too, this Oscar Wilde quotation that I love, the books that the world calls immoral are books that show its own shame. And that really speaks a lot to me, because I think that when I look at the whole, everyone can get online and find books that have been banned, but the typical reasons that books are banned all is for sex. So there's some kind of hatred of the body, and depending who you're having sex with, and et cetera. So sex, violence, offensive language, Satanism and witchcraft, like, Harry Potter books, and religious issues. So it's often parents. When we talk about school boards, it's parents who are snitching on books. And I was thinking, I've written, a fair bit about being a child, or like growing up, and what happens when you grow up in a house. Like the household, your home is the first narrative you ever encounter. And what happens if that narrative is not one that makes a lot of sense to you, or not one that you want to, not one that you agree with? So when I think about the kind of writer I am today, I've always gravitated towards books towards writing very like political topics that I guess in a way do deal with our shame. So the world's shame, like how we have treated people who don't fit into the dominant narrative. So my first novel, The Unfinished Child, it looks at the eugenics history in Alberta. These were, university professors signing off to have people sterilized without their consent. These were educated human beings, right? My most recent novel, The Shade Tree, looks at the shame of the treatment of African Americans in the Jim Crow era. And interestingly, people often will write, like in reviews, they think my novel is set during slavery. Well, it's not. Slavery ended in 1865, but Jim Crow was another set of, it was slavery with different words, right? So the shame of how we treat people, the shame of, anything outside of the dominant culture. So again, with the rise of white supremacy, like we're dealing with this all over again. Another war, like have we not learned? Are we not? My older son said to me today, so sweet, you know, like out of the mouths of babes. He's not that young, but he said, you know, when I think about World War II, I think, okay, well, I kind of can get that because they probably weren't that smart back then. He says, but I kind of thought we'd be a bit better now. And books have helped me to be better. I try to write books that make me want to be a better person. I look for books that push me, that elevate me, that emotionally speak to me, to explain the world that's not meeting the standards I think that we can reach. And that moves me profoundly. So I remember I did a reading, I had a launch for my first book. We talked about this earlier in the green room. I haven't had a launch for my new book, but my first book, I read a section from my novel, The Unfinished Child, and it was a very moving section. And I was at the front of the, you know, obviously reading, and I started to cry. And I thought, oh my God, like I wrote the damn book, right? Like, you know what happens, Theresa? Like, why are you crying? But it was just, you know, like the things that humans live with are not like, they're different, but the same. You know, what do we want? We want love. We want to love and be loved. We want to be free from suffering. We want to have happiness, right? So anyway, I think so the shame of eugenics, the shame of, you know, how we treat non-whites, you know, there's just a lot of shame. And I think that what we're aiming for, the books that make me feel like I want to be better, are the books that show the deep humanity and how sometimes when people do things I don't understand, if their motive is love and compassion, that takes it to a whole new level, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to stop there because I look forward to hearing what others say and having a conversation. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Theresa. Yeah, that's great. I had like, yeah, Oscar Wilde is like I have that little quote on my bullet points as well. Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Shazia Hafiz Ramji. Shazia was the winner of the 2021 Poetry and Prose Prize presented by the Southern Alberta Art Gallery, finalist for the 2021 National Magazine Awards, and a finalist for the 2021 Mitchell Prize for Faith and Poetry. She is the author of Port of Being, which I think is Invisible Press. I have a copy of it in my bin, but I haven't pulled it out since I moved. Sorry, where was I? Shazia lives in Calgary and Vancouver, where she is at work on a novel. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Benjamin, for setting us up so nicely, and Theresa for that personal introduction to the whole session, and to everyone for being here tonight with us. I recognize some poets in the audience as well, and Annie McClellan from BPC, who I spoke with. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you, June and Shelf Life, always supporting us. So I've been reading a lot of Alice Munro lately, almost reading her work as a kind of guide through my life. You know, I've had the privilege of working with her archives here at the University of Calgary. And in particular, I've been looking at her fan letters that she kept from the mid-70s to in 1982. And in the research that I was doing, I saw that she had received these kind of hate letters in 1978. And so I imagined that it had to do with her, you know, international rise as an author in 1978, because that's the year that her book, Who Do You Think You Are, was published. And it also received recognition in the UK. So I just presumed that inevitably with more recognition comes hate mail, right? But in fact, I was wrong, because the letters she received in 1978 were a response to something that was going on since the early 70s. When Alice Munro's Lives of Girls and Women was published in 1971. And it was being challenged all throughout the 70s. In 1976, a high school principal in Peterborough, Ontario, removed that novel from a grade 13 reading list. He said that he questioned its suitability because of the explicit language and the description of the sex scenes, as Jeff Solot had reported in the Globe and Mail, and which people still continue to report on today. But I was curious essentially in this research about how the censorship debate started. because in the archives, there's a speech by Monroe against censorship during this time in the 70s. And coincidentally, in the same week that I was at the archives looking at that letter, trying to trace the trajectory of how the censorship debate began, I got an email from Dorothy at the Writers Guild asking me to be on this panel. And I began to wonder, if Monroe had a role in the Freedom to Read Week origins. And it turns out that she did. So I emailed the Book and Periodical Council to request some info on the origins of Freedom to Read. And Franklin Carter, who's one of the editors and a contributor to the Book and Periodical Council, he got back to me and he shared a sheet on the origins of Freedom to Read Week, which is actually rooted in the 70s. And Franklin writes, during these years, a few citizens across Canada pressured local school boards and public libraries to remove contemporary novels by authors such as Timothy Finley, W.O. Mitchell, and Alice Munro from their shelves. The book banners objected to the use of profanity, blasphemy, and depictions of sex in fiction. They didn't want young people, including high school students, reading these novels, end quote. Thank you to Franklin for sharing that with me. And, that just made clear the connections between Monroe in the 70s and the origins of Freedom to Read initiatives in Canada. And thinking about the resonances now, I'm interested in how the censorship debate has changed and rises over and over again. But more recently, I'm thinking about what happened in 2019 in Southern Ontario again, when there was a book burning in Francophone Ontario schools, and about 4,700 books were burned in the name of reconciliation, because they were burning the books because they were outdated books with colonial tropes. And in a video that was prepared for the students about the book burning, the students were told, quote, "We bury the ashes of racism, discrimination, and stereotypes in the hope that we'll grow up in an inclusive country where all can live in prosperity and security," unquote. So that obviously received a lot of flashback and was heavily denounced because, of course, censorship here is a way of rewriting history by diminishing the impact of colonization through this act of book burning, right? And yeah, just like Theresa and just like you shared, Benjamin, I've been wondering whether the notion of freedom needs an update, because the whole notion of freedom itself has been appropriated not only by the right wing, but also in the book publishing industry. Like I'm thinking of Janine Cummins, who wrote American Dirt. There was a lot of controversy around that book because of the exploitation of the narrative of immigrants, particularly the Latinx immigrants crossing the American border. And so these kinds of debates are all up for debate now. I think I will stop there, because I feel like I talked a lot. So thank you for listening.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much, Shazia. It wasn't too much at all. I know too much. I'm wearing a chartreuse fringe shirt to a professional talk. You were just right. That's really interesting. Lives of Girls and Women is another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, just because Dale, it's one of my favorite novels, but it is kind of sicky. Like I can see why people would wonder about it, but that it would have even been complained about is kind of shocking to me. What was and is to this day transgressive, kind of to some people, but not to others. So thanks. Last but not least, we come to Ms. Ifoma Chinwuba. Ifoma is a poet, novelist, essayist, and literary critic, and she's the University of Alberta's current writer-in-residence. Lucky them. Writer-in-residence programs are so great, and it's like so great to learn from somebody outside of your department sometimes. Get a different take. She holds a master's in political science from the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Her career in the Foreign Service of Nigeria culminated in her appointment as ambassador to Côte d'Ivoire. Her writing career went in tandem with her diplomatic one. So far, she has published 5 books. They include 3 full-sized award-winning novels, a drama in verse, and a juvenile novella. Her Waiting for Maria was longlisted for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize in 2008. Ms. Chinwuba's diplomatic service transported her to numerous countries. The places that struck her most are the Canadian Rockies, the Rift Valley in Kenya, the Victoria Falls in Zambia and Zimbabwe, the Holy Lands, Israel and Palestine, and the ancient city of Efes in Turkey. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Thank you so much for being here, Ifoma. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, Writers Guild of Alberta, for inviting my perspective as a writer on access to books, right to reading, book ban, the whole lot. I would like to, since my predecessors have talked about the Canadian experience or Russian experience, I like to bring in the African experience here, the Nigerian experience, really. And it is to say that access to books presupposes literacy or numeracy. Access to books presupposes that there is education, that the children are going to school. And now we are wondering what books to ban, what books to restrict, stuff like that. But where I come from, going to school is a problem. The ability to even go to school is a big issue because we have a problem of insurgencies. And I'm sure you have heard of Boko Haram, the Boko Haram terrorists that have been terrorizing Nigeria for the past 10 years, 12 years. And the Boko Haram itself, the name means book, ban. See, Boko Haram is just a pejorative way of saying boko, book, boko. And you know in Arabic, haram means ban, not allowed, forbidden. So Boko Haram itself means no books. We don't want books. We don't want education for our children. And I'm sure you have heard of the abductions in Chibok, how girls in the secondary school were abducted. And about 273 girls till today, as we speak. Over 100 are still in the bush or wherever, have been sold into slavery, have not returned to their parents or to their schools. And while we are suffering all these things, other abductions have taken place. There's Dapchi, there's Kaduna, there's so many. So they just swoop on the schools and make away with the students and teachers even. Now, it used to be an everyday occurrence. Every week, 2-3 schools would be targeted. And what did government do? The government said, look, we cannot continue this kidnap business. And they closed down schools. Over 200 schools were closed down. The kids are at home. With the effect now that in Nigeria, this morning last week I thought it was 10.5 million school children out of school. 10.5 million children out of school. But this morning I read the UN report and said it's 13.2 million now. So there is a blizzard of abductions resulting in closure of schools. And so literacy has gone down. And so people are not even talking of books. What book can I read? What book can I not read? They are unable, incapable of even reading. They're not able to read. Literacy has fallen. Now, so the school is not there to teach them to read. Forget about what they are going to read. I know people say, oh, what of e-school? During this pandemic, we had a lot of remote learning. You know, you give them laptops. The teacher is teaching from wherever, and the kids are being taught at home. But then we have a problem of electricity again, and the problem of equipment. So that e-school aspect is also foreclosed to them. We don't have that. Apart from that, there's also the issue of early marriage for girls. 10 years, 12 years, 13 years, 14 years, they are married off by their parents. because they don't want to invest in females. They're going to get married and then all my investment, all my money is gone on it. So once they are 10, 12, 13, they're married off. So girl child is also militating against education of our girls in some communities. Coming over to civilized world where schooling is not a problem, where there's security, there's even free education, because back home, even when you have in the South, where there's no security problem, schools are open, people are going to school, many don't go to school because of cost, because we don't have free education there yet. So you have to pay through your nose even. And so you find that many parents too involved in child labor. Instead of sending their kids to school, in the morning they put something on you, go and sell this, go and sell oranges, go and sell what, go and work. Or you work in the farm, or you work in the family business. So school is foreclosed to some people over there. Here we are talking of books, ban. And I ask myself, this book banning in Western societies, in societies where schooling is not a problem, who is doing the banning? Who is doing the banning? And what are they banning? Of course, in most instances, it is the parents who are banning books. And Theresa, you said books on violence, witchcraft, and all that. But there are also books on sexual orientation. Sexual orientation, especially if it is not hetero, if it's not the one we are used to. Parents frown at that. Parents frown at gender identity even. Gender identity. We don't want, children, reading about other possibilities of, apart from cisgender. Cisgender, they know. They don't want to know anything apart from that. Sexual content, you also mentioned. Things that are explicitly sexual, a lot of sex inside it. Religion too. Religion. There's a lot of, even in the Catholic Church, I'm a Catholic. I know growing up, we had to look for the nihil obstat. Every book that my parents allowed us to read, on religion, had to have that nihil obstat. It's a Latin expression that means no obstacle to your faith. You can read this book. It does not constitute, danger to your faith. So of course, we've heard of Salman Rushdie's satanic verses banned. We know that ISIS burnt books in Mosul. We know that, even in Turkey, books were burned, publishing houses closed. These are the things. And then, of course, critical race theory. Critical race theory. I don't want a book like To Kill a Mockingbird, for instance, was banned and is still being banned in some places because it was talking about the blacks. The black man that had been accused of rape and all was freed, had the right to be freed. So some parents ban those books from or restrict access to those books by their children. And I am looking at, I support restriction of certain books to that youth, that young demographic. I support it because if you do not agree that a girl of 10 or 12 or 13 should get married, if you do not agree that a young man should involve in such sexual, why do you give him a book on sex to read? What does he do after he reads about sex? What does he do? Why should we restrict? Why should we put guardrails that children cannot have access to alcohol until they are 18, cannot have access to cigarettes until they cannot even vote, because their mental ability at that time cannot process, it's not developed. Why do you introduce them to sexual material, to gender identity? Why would you do that? if you can introduce them to that, allow them to get married at whatever age you allow them to read the books. So I would opt for what the equivalent of parental guidance, PG. Some movies, they put PG. That is, a kid cannot process this thing at this tender age. So let the parents watch, maybe walk him or her through that movie. The same with some books. In my view, so we should not give free access to every book, to every child. Suppose a child is depressive, is sad, and then he gets hold of a book on suicide. What does he do? And even in some books, they tell you how to kill yourself if you're feeling sad. It has happened, even on websites. It's an issue that could be sorted out by counseling or by medication. You find, oh, the kid is on his own, he kills himself. The next morning, the parents come and they say, he's dead, because he had access to materials that his brain could still not process. So I'd like to, I'm going to, but while I support that there should be free access to books by adults, because they can process it, whatever it is, they get more knowledge, they can process what it's all about, they can rationalize. But for kids, young children, we should not. We should practice self-censorship ourselves as parents, or well, by extension, teachers, legislators, whoever, guardians. We should practice self-censorship. And if you may allow me to refer to, I don't know if you have read Odysseus, the Greek mythology, where Odysseus, after fighting the Trojan Wars, he was going home. And Zeus advised him, when you pass the island of the Sirens, don't listen to their song, because if you listen to their song, they're going to tempt you and you're going to fall. You're going to be tempted to fall into their embrace, to their song and all. So Odysseus, block the ears of your sailors with beeswax. And Odysseus himself wanted to listen to the songs of the Sirens. He was curious. But then Circe also advised him, then tie yourself, get your crew to tie you up on the pole, so that if you listen, but you are unable to go to join them, to be tempted. And so his crew ties him up on the pole while he blocks their ears with beeswax. And when he gets to that island, the Sirens are singing, all those sweet, sweet songs and all. And Odysseus wants to go to them, but he's restrained by the ropes. And that is how they escape, because of that self-censorship. Because if he had listened to the song of the Sirens without being tied, without being restrained, they would have met their death there. So there are some books that are very dangerous. Books are dangerous in themselves, yes. Some books are very dangerous. They can turn your head, turn your life, turn everything around. So some books are so dangerous that we must practice self-censorship at that level. Don't say, oh, I can read it and oh, it won't affect me. Oh, no, I can do this. I can watch this movie. It won't affect me. I can read this book. Oh, no, I'm strong. No. It's like a man who says, oh, I can drink. I know my limit. I can drink. And then you see him lying on the road. He knows his limit. So we must practice self-censorship when it comes to some books and where our children are concerned. As they grow up, as they age, as they get to age of maturity, we can now introduce these books to them. And a caveat, we know how ubiquitous books are now, because a kid that has a tablet, he can access any books. So you can tell him, oh, don't read this book yet, you're too young for it. And then he goes into his room and he opens the thing, gets it on Kindle or whatever. So I think what parents should do, or teachers, is to encourage children to discuss any books they read with parents too. See, so you may sneak in and read this book, but be free to discuss it with me, your mother, your father, your guardian, so that you can infuse your own perspective, your own values. You can guide his thinking of what he has read. So let me stop here too, so that others can chime in. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ifoma. That was really great. Especially, yeah, like contextualizing it outside of Western reading practices. Like it feels glib to kind of go on about, oh, my reading rights and things like that when it's, you know, access to literature and education is not a substantive right guaranteed everywhere on our planet at this time. And yeah, very interesting. I'm really glad you spoke freely about like self-censorship. That's a really interesting idea to me. As I mentioned with the Samizdat earlier about like the Soviet Union practice of passing along illicit materials, it's a little bit, I think about the internet a lot in those terms. I guess because it's just free access to everything, but it's a very different relationship when you're handing peer-to-peer, when you're transmitting knowledge between people, and when you're creating huge banks of information for anyone to access. And I think kind of tied to what we discussed earlier about, you know, the emancipatory potential of literature, that power is, yeah, it's volatile. It can skew both ways, certainly. Anyway, I don't want to rant, but do any of the other panelists want to hop in, pick up on anything with each other? And then, yeah, I took like a lot of bullet points as everyone was talking. I'm kind of lost. Does anybody have any topics they'd like to take the lead with here?
What is to be done?
I was just going to say, I had no idea that Boko Haram meant book banning, like, or restriction. That, and that's makes, I mean, that's without, you know, like freedom to read, or like you said, literacy, that presupposes literacy. These are, you know, quite fundamentally linked to democracy, right? So if you reduce literacy, and again, like now, even like with the internet, where all of a sudden the internet will be gone, right? You have no access. But you know, having access to intellectual ideas, or to even being able to read, is the beginning of often your own freedom. I guess the one thing I would quibble with a little bit is, what if you grow up in a household with parents who don't have belief systems that you support? And maybe this is a Western, you know, thing. So for example, if you're you know, if you know, a child is gay and is living in a fundamentalist house, and like the parents are not going to help with that. If your parents have, you know, kind of racist views, and you are wanting to think more liberally, your parents necessarily aren't going to help you with that. So I guess where I might quibble a little bit is the assumption that the parents are actually sharing viewpoints that mesh with your own. And like I know in my case, that like having access to different ideas from what I was exposed to, or that my parents might support, was really critical to me to find my own kind of path a little bit. But I also understand, it's kind of like, even now I practice self-censorship, and like I don't watch violent movies. I'm like, no, I'm not letting that in my head. I'm just not doing that. But I'm also an adult, so.
Well, why do we put guardrails when it comes to alcohol, for instance? Why do we say you're not old enough to drink alcohol or smoke or even vote? So if the age of majority is 18, I think the kid can wait if he's 18 to decide what he wants to do, or what he wants to be, what he wants to believe in, or what he wants his life to go, in my view. So the guardrails should extend to his sexuality. Yeah, should extend to his sexuality. or sexuality. Can restrict you from smoking and drinking and doing all those things. You might as well wait until, okay, we we have a saying that we all come fully made. Once we are born, we have all the equipment, but we are not ready. Kids are not ready. In South Africa, in those days, a lot of HIV, AIDS, and they somehow got into their head that if a man is HIV positive and he sleeps with a virgin, he will be healed, he'll be cured. And so men were raping kids, babies, 15-month-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old babies. So they have the equipment, but they are not ready. That's my position. You may see somebody is 12, 13, 14, and say, oh, his sexuality is this, is that. How do you know? He's not ready. His mind, he cannot, in my view. If we can legislate against all this alcohol and other things, we have to legislate other things until they are 18, until their minds can process what they are reading, what they are doing, in my view. If not, if you say they are old enough, or they can read anything, or they can decide their gender, they can change their gender, they can do what they like at 12, 13, 14, 15, then allow them to drink alcohol, allow them to smoke, allow them to vote. If they can decide that, then let it open. That's my view.
I think there's something to be said as well about the parental kind of interpolation of these things. Certainly, I think, at least in my space, I grew up in a house where we don't read a ton of books and do a ton of things, and I certainly found my way into being a weirdo, even though I was on a farm and had no access to internet that worked, or even many books. So, I certainly hope for everyone that they are able to find themselves, and there is an interesting gap between what we do and we don't legislate. And I guess it just makes me think about just like anything under prohibition, people eventually find a way to do it anyway, right? So if we do have, if we're fortunate enough to have relationships with parents or mentors or siblings who can help us unpack those experiences, or like, oh, I read this thing, or I watched this crazy, I almost swore, sorry, I was about to say effed up. But especially with the internet, I mean, we just were exposed to so much, and even outside of the internet, as I mentioned at the outset of this presentation, there's something about, like, even we don't consent to having the news bombard us with constant tragedy over and over and over, and the news is not necessarily a neutral reporting platform, and so there's something about just, we at a certain point, I wonder if we aren't just kind of obligated to we're going to experience things that we're not ready for sometimes, and where the world isn't the world. I mean, referring to it as handrails or guidelines, like that, they're only so useful insofar as they match the world, and the world is just, it's what it is, right? It's quite difficult. But thank you for sharing your views on that. I know it's hard to talk about things at all, ever, right? Especially because we're in a very reactionary culture as well, which I also blame on the internet, which I love the internet, but it terrifies me. Yeah, and it's really interesting. Thanks, Theresa, for reiterating your point. Like, it is one of my favorite musicians is Ray Spoon, whose art and writing are all tangled up in how art has saved their life, and from a religious household that was very difficult for them to grow up in. So I think there's certainly something to be said there. Yeah. Geez, I have too many thoughts. Anyone else have anything that you wanted to pick up on from anyone's chats?
Yeah, I just appreciate what you said, Benjamin, about, essentially life finds a way, that Jurassic Park line where, if you want something, you will find it regardless of any intervention, because I wouldn't have ended up being a poet if my mom had been with me all the way, through, because I grew up in a very fundamentalist household and I love my parents and I still do, but, we have very different values still today, even today. But that doesn't mean that I love them any less. There's my ability to, it's taken a long time, but it has come through for me to exist alongside them, for me to love them, and for them to accept who I am and what I want to do with my life and how they see what I should be doing with my life. And I think that's what books have taught me, really. It's just that there will be a way, it expands the range of possibility of what we see as our life. It allows us to intervene in the stories that we're told to make a story for ourselves.
And I don't have the quote handy. I think it's Dodie Bellamy, an essay in there's an anthology called Biting the Error. They're discussing just the idea of what's transgressive to them in their own communities as a queer writer is like they couldn't even write something transgressive, but for other readers, even the mildest kind of iteration of their own community is completely unthinkable. So we have these degrees of understanding and separation that kind of toss this whole question. It's like there's no objective, oh well, this is obscenity, because for a lot of people, and especially I think framing the discussion toward adults, like even for adults, like some of us have particular sensitivities, some of us, which isn't to dismiss them, but it's to say like some of us are triggered by certain things, some of us find understanding in reading something similar, some of us can't even begin to approach it. And sometimes more marginalized writers, just by expressing themselves honestly, end up in a position where people are shocked that they've said something. Even the article I mentioned earlier on Freedom to Read Week, Desmond Cole, he's like, he's a really, really great public intellectual here in Canada. But he's always like, when he gets interviewed for the national news, he says, let's start the conversation here, because I'm tired of starting it here just because you're shocked or you're surprised, right? And it's kind of an incredible perspective of just saying, I know the gap in your knowledge here. I know that this exists. Here's where we're going to start, and you can handle this part on your own, or we don't need to have the discussion, right? Which is kind of incredible. Because as soon as you're talking about free speech, people get a little squirrely, I find, as soon as you start to say free speech, and here's our set of ground rules, right? Because we assume it's some kind of anarchic sentiment as opposed to a mindful pursuit of how we take care of each other and how we teach each other.
Well, I think too, I want to talk about, maybe you guys can name a book, or maybe you remember a book where I remember when I was living in Montreal, I missed my metro stop because I was so engrossed in a book. And it was actually The Metamorphosis by Kafka. I just like, oh my God, he turns into a bug. Like, what the heck is going on here? I was so engrossed in this that I looked up, like, where am I? And I had to get off and run around and go someplace else. And I guess that's kind of a weird thing, but I want to talk about too, like just the, clearly there's great power in language and ideas, but also the wonder that we get exposed to. So we can get, because that's kind of a politics as well that maybe we don't focus enough on, is the possibilities and the hope. It's so much, like, I don't know if you've tried to write a happy story. It's so much harder to write something, happy than something that's, but anyway, so to engage with wonder and possibility and hope and sentiments that elevate you, which is, again, it's kind of weird to talk about you know, Gregor Samsa turning into a bug, but that was such like, what did that do to me? I don't even know what it did to me. Like, sometimes I don't even have words to describe what happened to me when I'm reading, but something has happened, and like there's some emotional shift or something else where I just look at the world a little bit differently. And I think that's not to be lost in the whole politics of language, I think.
Yeah. Well, as I said, if I may come in, books play a very important role in our lives, especially, I mean, all the knowledge you can think of in the world is contained in the books. All the knowledge out there, if you can read, whatever it is. You go to the bookshop now, you know, people, sometimes you ask people, what do you do? And they say, I'm a writer. But everybody's a writer now. You go to the bookshop, you see some books written by politicians, by celebrities, by medical doctors, psychologists, lawyers. Everybody writes. Everybody writes, either to impart something, or maybe something has happened to them in their memoirs, and they want people to know how I escaped, how I. So everybody writes now. So there's books out there, and you see, some books some subjects, some topics are embarrassing. Embarrassing for maybe your parent, for you to ask your parent or a friend or a teacher. But a book, you're not embarrassed with a book. See, you are there with a book, whatever it is, it tells you how it is, and you are good. There's no shame. There's no shame. Even some things you may be afraid or ashamed to ask your mom or your dad, for instance. But a book, you're not ashamed, you're not afraid. It tells you the way it is, and it enlarges your cost. So you know what you want to learn. So books should not be banned, because they educate us. Like I said, it's for adults. If you're over 18, any book you want to read, you should be able to read it. It should not be banned in the libraries. Oh, don't put this, don't stock this in. Even some, and I think the greatest people who reduce access to books or who ban books are the agents and the book publishers. Because there are so many writers out there. They spend 1 year, 2, 3, 4 years, they craft something, they read, they write, and they send to an agent. Oh, after 3, 4 months, or say, oh, no, it doesn't meet our standard, it doesn't meet our that. Okay, you can't get a publisher to publish your book. So they are also part of the people who reduce access to books. Okay, and then look at J.K. Rowling's book. So many people rejected, so many, I don't know, agents and publishers rejected her books until I think Bloomsbury said, oh, okay, we'll publish. Imagine if she lost hope and said, oh, this book is no good. I've lost that book, all those series. So many authors will tell you, oh, I tried, I was rejected 30 times, 40 times, 50 times. Some lost hope. So agents too are part of those who reduce access to books. Publishers too. Sometimes they tell you, oh, we don't want to deal with hate, any books on hate, any books. Why not? It's an emotion that is out there. It is part of our lives. You hate, people hate. But we, so people hate, and now with self-publishing and all that online, and you write, you put it out there, anybody can have access to it. So it's good those books are published, and then parents help to discuss with the children. Oh, this is too violent, it's gone, we don't want, it can lead to jail, it can lead to, your life is lost if you so they rationalize it. Look at the young guy in Michigan, whose parents bought a gun for him. He was just 12 or 13. What did he do? He went to school and killed his classmates. See, parents at 13, 12. Why do you buy a gun for him? So a book is as dangerous as a gun. Some books, not all, of course. Some books, those books that deal with issues that surpass the young person's understanding. You should try to protect them from those books. And it's protective. I'm not denying them. It's protective for your demographic. By the time you reach 18, become an adult, these books are there for you. You've already matured. Your brain can take it. So I would, what am I saying in essence is that for adults, there should be no book banning. For adults, they should have access to books because they can process it, the information there.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That, for adults, legislators and governments, autocratic governments that we heard that in Turkey, for instance, in 2018, they burnt over 300,000 books in Turkey. Burned so many books. And it jailed some authors, even jailed some publishers, closed down publishing houses because they tried to control the mind of their citizens. That we should not encourage, that we should frown at. Thank you.
Of course. Just to pick up on what you said about like the publishing industry, I have a quote here from Matilda Bernstein Sycamore in an article on LitHub called "Writing on Your Own Terms." I would receive responses from agents that said, "I love what you're doing here, but the publishing industry is just too conservative. But how will that ever shift if these are the people in charge of whose work gets attention?" Then there are the editors that echo the same narratives, and maybe even more jarring, there are the editors who love everything about the manuscript, but then they don't have the power to do their job and acquire the work they love. And this happens both in corporate and independent publishing. Then, of course, there are the editors and agents who say something like, "I love what you're doing here. No one else is doing anything like it, but I just don't find myself relating on a deep enough level. And so I don't think I'm the right person to truly champion your work and make sure it receives the attention it deserves." But if an editor or publisher has to relate to everything they publish, then publishing is only for the people who make those decisions. Yeah, it does seem like there's, I think, many of us might agree that there are certain ways that experiences are commodified and certain voices and certain, and that marginalized writers are kind of jumping through hoops to perform very particular versions of their stories, and they're often not getting to express themselves in an honest way unless they hit certain buzzwords or certain kind of tropes. And in the same article, Matilda asks, we've kind of clawed for publishers to start representing a variety, like a wider variety of literature that's not just dead old white men. What guarantee do we have that those things aren't going to be clawed back? Which I'm not, I wonder if these trends will continue in publishing at all. Like, I don't know. The whole thing, the two times I've been published, I have no idea how it happened. It was just people that seemed to like me and didn't run away when I sent them something. But I've sent out a lot of stuff that just has gotten those same kinds of rejections, or kind of like, now and then I've gotten a snotty letter saying, "Well, people don't think like this. Why would you write it?" It's like, why? I think like this. That's why I wrote it. So yeah, it's really interesting. Shazia and Theresa, do you have anything, any relationship to that with your experiences with publishing, or what you're kind of asked to do as writers?
Yeah, thank you, Benjamin. That's such a great quote. And I love where this conversation is going, because it's so important to talk about how marginalized writers are asked to talk about lived experience as opposed to their aesthetic experience or the work. At least this was what happened with me initially when Port of Being came out. Because as you may know, at the end of the book, there is an author's note in which I talk about how I wrote the book during this time when I was stalked by someone who stole my laptop and my phone, and I was stalked for a full year by this guy. And I was very obsessed with surveillance, and that informs the book a lot. Like, a lot of the book is about the internet, about surveillance, about technology, about how that changes the way we interact with each other, about relationships. But when I was all the discussions, this is not about Invisible at all, but just about the advice that I received from people in general to make the book do well was to talk about this experience of being stalked. And I said, well, I don't want to talk about it. I'm not ready to talk about it. That's not what the book is about. You know, I approached my book at a slant, and that's, I think that that's true to the artistic process of writing, which is approaching things at a slant, not approaching things in the sense of, I'm going to write about stalking, and this is what stalking is. That's a very different kind of writing than I was doing at that time. And so trying to navigate that discussion and being aware of how I shaped my own narrative and had to take power of my own narrative to give my work the narrative and the recognition that it is represented in it, as opposed to it being a representation of this lived experience alone, separate from the work, was something I really struggled with. I hope that made sense.
Oh, yeah.
And
I was
Theresa,
just
do you?
going to say,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, I was just pausing and thinking what I want to say. I think that, so I'm a novelist, so I've so far anyway, but so my experience in writing is that I have an idea, and then it goes through so many different versions that the people I start out with as my characters, sometimes characters show up who I had no idea were going to show up. And so the story ends up in this, not to get mystical, but it gets weird. Like, I don't know what happens. I'm just like the vehicle for some story. So I wanted to write with, in my latest novel, The Shade Tree, I wanted to write about white supremacy. And as Ifoma said, why not, like, we need to write about hate. Like, it's ugly, but it's prevalent. We can't just pretend it doesn't exist. So to write about white supremacy, I wanted to write about, when you live in a sick society, you just become sick, right? Like, you become sick, and what is normal for you, I mean, it's very easy for people to assume that they wouldn't be a particular way. So it's historical fiction. But anyway, it was a hard book to write, and I wasn't like, and I was kind of thinking that, what the heck am I doing writing this book? And I kind of think that the only way it was to get published is because I sent it to a lot of places and had a lot of rejections, was the Guernica Prize was a separate, outside of a publishing house, and it was blind jury, which was just one of those weird things, because I think that, I think that the publishing industry has an idea. It's like, you throw spaghetti at the wall and they know which two books are going to stick, and that's what they put all their money into. And so I think that the publishing world writ large really does have an idea of what they think is going to work. But I think if we're trying to work on becoming, like, I'm always trying to become a better person, I think, I hope on our human journey we're trying to do that to create characters who are, in situations that are not good, some better than other characters, like, and if you care about them, something happens with you in terms of your empathy reflex, possibly. So I think we have to write hard stories, and again, for whatever reason, I seem to be drawn to these topics that like, what about genetic testing? Are we to determine certain humans aren't of value to be on this planet? And are we targeting certain individuals? What about, race? What about sexuality? What about, so for me, the power of story is profound, so I don't know, I kind of talked all around there, but I do think it's important to write those tough stories. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no,
There's
I mean,
a lot of hate.
I love
There's
that.
a lot of hate in our world right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the thing, is like, it feels like a big move to just speak frankly about things sometimes. And I think sometimes we treat literature as like popcorn, like as entertainment, the way we think of films. But to me, what literature offers us that everything at Cineplex this week doesn't offer us is like a deep, sustained engagement with a different perspective. Like it's just an entirely different, and like I love genre books. I love horror. I love some old westerns. But even like if like poetry, there's no money in, like it's just not even an industry. It's like a prestigious hobby, I guess, for some people. And so it feels like maybe for some of us writing in poetry, we have freedom to do that. Maybe what we can't do in a novel or a play, or like it just feels like as soon as it's divorced from capital, you're allowed to speak frankly. But when it's not, then it's supposed to be politically neutral or story first, entertainment first, and then, as if story was this hermetic little star in the sky that superseded everything, right? Anyway, I'm talking too much now. My brain is buzzing with all of these really, really, really great thoughts. Does anybody in chat have any questions? We're kind of coming up on an end time, I think, for things. If anybody wanted to throw a question or a comment into the chat for any of the panelists, I believe they'd be happy to help you, unless you were rude, at which point I'd tell you to frig off. Yeah, and if nobody has any comments or questions, then maybe we'll start to wrap up if that sounds good to anybody. If anybody has anything else they'd like to throw out there, I'm also eager to listen. CS Weisenthal writes in the chat, thank you to all three panelists for very suggestive reflections on literacy, access, education, democracy, the relative concept of freedom, and so much more. Thank you to everyone who's come to listen to the talk tonight as well. Thank you. Oh man, it's not Friday. I was like, oh, it's Friday. It's amazing people are here. You can tell I'm unemployed at the moment. The calendar has no meaning. I mean, I'm on a farm. I'm keeping busy. But yeah, thank you so much to Theresa, Shazia, and Ifoma.
Thank you.
Just like, yeah, I was very nervous about this. I haven't done public speaking in some time, and I'm a bit of a bullshitter, so I love to talk, and being nervous and talking too much are not good combinations. So thank you everybody for supporting
I was
me.
just gonna say, shout out to your parents for not running the microwave, so your internet.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure they're waiting to heat up leftovers and their magic bags for their achy backs. And thank you to Jun and everyone at Shelf Life Books in Calgary. They're great. They always help my mom find crazy things for me. And thank you to Dorothy Bentley and the Writers Guild of Alberta for asking me and for asking everyone here to come out and do this. And I believe this might actually be online later via Shelf Life Books. So keep an eye peeled if you want to share this incredible talk with other people.
I just want to say one last thing. I've been thinking of just the way that I spoke about my parents now, and I just realized that their restrictions and their sort of pushback against me was so necessary for my growth. Like, I don't think I would have been able to be who I was if I didn't have that push and pull. And it feels like a kind of universal rule of life where there has to be this tension for growth. And so I'm really appreciative for this conversation and for the tensions that it's brought up in me, and just for your moderation. Benjamin is so skillful. You just like octopus, all the conversation threads going in all directions. And Theresa and Ifeoma, I learned so much from you. So thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, for the perspectives you bring, from all over the world, Russia, Europe, everything. And it was easy because already you gave examples, and we just had to, write on the crest of what you provided. So, and being writers, we write, so we have an idea what is involved. I think literature really, for those who write, Theresa, you're writing about hatred and all that, and the need to write about these things. But I think literature is, is writing something without calling its name. can be done. I think that's literature. Why is this an academic work? Literature means calling something, saying something without mentioning its name. If I can refer to Mark Antony in is it Julius Caesar? When he said, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears," he led the people to fight, to war against Brutus without mentioning war, without abusing Brutus and the others. So are they all honorable men? You see, so that's literature. You make people see hatred, make people see the emotions without calling the word its name. That's what the writers do. And thank you so much for your inputs.
Awesome. Yeah, and thank you so much again, Ifeoma. Thank you, everyone. This was best night I've had in a long time. It's great to get together with people and talk about things I love. So, I'm gonna run.